Steiner. I have a love-hate relationship with them. They make some of the pinnacle scopes for their segments in my opinion. Perfect case in point, the P4Xi 1-4x24. It is still, in my opinion, one of the most well-rounded second focal plane LPVOs on the market. The military 4-16x50 and the P4Xi 4-16x56 were also both very good scopes for their intended markets back when they first came out. And talking about a little bit from the future, the MPS, or the micro pistol sight, has quickly become one of my favorite enclosed pistol red dots. Steiner is absolutely capable of making excellent quality scopes. But the T5 series, more specifically the 3-15x50 and the 5-25x56, were tremendous letdowns for more than one reason. When Steiner finally announced the T6Xi series that would supersede the T5s, I was secretly really excited. I was hoping that they would learn from some of the mistakes from the T5s and improve upon them. So the question that I am looking to answer in this video is that truly the case? Well, let's do a real quick physical overview of this thing before we get behind it some more. If you want to find a more detailed unboxing video, watch any of my other Steiner videos. Most of the Steiner boxes are more or less the same. They come in very high density cardboard with good cut foam on the inside. There's all the information that you're going to need to know on the side of this box, and it's pretty self-explanatory from there. Cracking open the top, and you will see that this box is fit for multiple size of the T6 series scopes. This is technically the middle one, or mostly middle one. There are 4 different magnifications: the 1-6, the 2.5-15, the 3-18, and the 5-30. Note that all of those have 6x magnifiers. And as you could tell where the front objective is in the box, you could see the foam has a little cut on both sides, so I wouldn't be surprised if this box houses all 4 different magnifications of this thing. Here are all of the 4 reticle options that you can get across the entire series. The KC1 is reserved only for the 1-6, the SCR only for the 2.5-15, and then the 3-18 that we have here and the 5-30 are with the MSR2, which is what this is, and the SCR2. Pulling this thing out of the box, and it comes with Tenebrex caps, which I really do like, and the sunshade is already pre-fit for it. If you've never gotten your hands on Tenebrex caps, they are made in Canada and are very well made, but they do not fold flat, unlike the Vortex Defender caps. I do think that the Vortex Defender caps are among the best on the market, but I'll leave that for you to decide. Weight-wise, Steiner claims this thing comes in about 34.5 ounces, and on my scale, we're almost bang on perfect, but I wonder if that extra 1/10 of an ounce or so is from the throw lever that is included. Putting up against my Meopta Optica 6-3-18x50 in the GG&G mount, it is a touch heavier, but that does include the mount. Overall, this scope is extremely short and thick. I really do like the proportions on it. The 34mm tube and 56mm front objective really do add something to the overall character on this thing. Taking a closer look at some of the components, we're going to start with the fast focus eyepiece, which does retain one of the best features from the T5s, which is that lock collar. This thing is incredibly smooth, very fast and very tight. There's very little to no wiggle once it's all the way out and a quarter turn in, and it just feels absolutely wonderful. If it did have a little bit of wiggle though, all you have to do is lock up on that ring, and you do not have to worry about this thing wiggling or losing its original position. I'm a huge fan of any scope that has a locking eyepiece like this, because once you set it to your eye, you should never have to adjust it again. This thing locks up extremely tight. There's very, very fine threads. A quick cinch like that, and this thing will not budge unless you break it. Very, very nice. Next up is something that looks quite familiar from many other Steiners. It is the magnification ring, and at a 180-degree sweep, it is completely average. This one does include the throw lever, which is really nice. On the earlier versions of some of their scopes, specifically the P4Xi 1-4s, they did not include the throw lever. It's really nice to see that for the roughly $1,800 that you could find these things for, that at least they include the throw lever. Again, there's nothing really to talk about. It feels really smooth in hand, and it feels well damped. The throw lever is an incredibly nice touch. It does clamp down on that ring, basically infinity. You can adjust it however you want to get it in the perfect position. You're not locked into a couple of different positions like you are on some other manufacturers. However, be mindful, you could over torque that thing and possibly collapse down on the magnification ring or strip out the screws. Unfortunately, Steiner decided it was perfectly fine to just keep the illumination control cap the same way that it's been on almost all of their scopes, even back to the military 4-16. And that is, the battery cap compartment and the dial to actually adjust the illumination are one and the same, meaning you have to go from one extreme lock to tighten or loosen this thing as you see fit. I am not the biggest fan of this because I feel really bad going to the bump stop and really wrenching on this thing, but that's how Steiner designed it a long time ago, and they've stuck with it. I guess there's no real issue with that, but I would much prefer seeing something like what Primary Arms did with their PLXC, which is having a slightly larger illumination control, but having the cap be recessed so this way you don't have to worry about it accidentally coming loose on you. You have to use a tool of some sort or a coin to loosen it and or tighten it, but at least you know that thing is never going to come off unless you want it to. Once we're inside the battery compartment, you can see the CR2450 3-volt coin battery. This is not standard. The standard is the CR2032, which is found in almost every other scope on the market. But Steiner, again, has chosen to run this battery for a very long time, and I guess it just works well for them. Another thing that Steiner carried over from the 3-15 T5Xi is the 25 meter minimum parallax. This is going to be huge for everyone that wants to shoot up close. The T5 5-25, the military 4-16, and the P4Xi 4-16 were all 50 meter minimums. So if you wanted to shoot this thing at maximum magnification at 50 yards, let's say, you wouldn't be able to get perfect parallax. So that could have been a real bummer. Full rotation on this thing is about 270 degrees, which is excellent. And again, unlike the T5, there is no weird feelings or sensations. Both the 3-15 and 5-25 T5s had a real weird feeling in it. It almost felt like there's a rubber band inside that would get wound and then unwound. I had sent in the 5-25 to get checked because the image on the thing was extremely poor and the parallax knob felt crappy, but Steiner gave it the clean bill of health and it made no improvement. It was not ideal. Not ideal? No, it was not ideal, not double negatives. Truth be told, Steiner did a pretty good job with the T5 series turrets, but they are vastly improved here with the T6s. The introduction of the locking collar on both the windage and the elevation really elevates this to the next level, in my opinion. And it's really cool to see that they decided to develop something that I have never seen on another scope, with the exception of the Shoryukens, if that's how you pronounce it, on the Marches. I know there's a more technical name for what March does, but for these, they are really quite nice. Having the twist lock up on the top of the turret means that you don't have to worry about having an internal mechanism that loosens up the actual cap on the erector, so you have less slop on the knobs when you are adjusting it. They feel really, really good in hand and sound quite incredible as well. You'll see more of that momentarily. The locks are a little bit challenging at first. It does require a little bit getting used to, especially if you're going to be grabbing the knob and twisting it really hard. If you're not fully seated on it, you might accidentally lock it as opposed to making an adjustment, whether it's on the windage or the elevation. But once they are locked, they are rock solid. And once they are loose, they, again, sound and feel quite excellent. So it's very apparent that Steiner made some very significant improvements on this series from the T5s. But did they make the most important adjustment, which is improving the glass clarity? Because again, those T5s were nothing really to write home about. Let's get behind it and find out. Taking a look at the MSR2 reticle here at 3x, you can see that even here in a perfectly bright-walled, bright condition, it is quite challenging to actually see the center of this reticle. In my humble opinion, it really starts to come into its own around 10x. From 10 to 18, it is excellent. Look at this thing. There's a ton of information. It is razor sharp edge to edge. Overall brightness is great on it. Even the illumination being green on here on maximum is quite good, and you will see just how good it is later on. But just know it is excellent. That CR2450 battery, I have no idea if they use that just for larger capacity so the illumination lasts longer, but Steiner's been using them for a very long time, so I bet they don't have any issues with them. But overall, the MSR2 reticle, in my opinion, is a little bit too fine for this magnification range. If this is on a 5-30, I think it would be really right at home, but on a 3-18, I think it's a little bit lacking. We'll touch more on what I think a proper reticle for this would be in the near future, aka the end of this video, but for right now, let's take a listen to those turrets. I really do think that Steiner did an exceptionally good job with these turrets, especially with that locking setup. I think for a lot of people, they're going to be turned off by it, but it's quite intuitive once you get the hang of it, and it really does allow it to be super easy to adjust and to lock and unlock on the fly, as opposed to having to lift up on some turrets and possibly shifting your zero. All you got to do is come over, a light twist of your fingers like that, it goes lock to unlock quite easily, and then you're good to go. For many of you, you want something more traditional, but lucky for you, there's a ton of other options out there. Having a precision rifle scope is all fine and dandy, but can it track properly and can it return to zero properly? Those are pretty important roles. Bringing it from 18 to 3x back to 18, there is no shift on the reticle to the target. There's no weird sort of shadowy issues. There's nothing. It lines up extremely good to the target, and getting the side focus set just so we have a very good looking image. I must say, the view looking through this thing is monstrous. The field of view is a little bit more than standard, and you'll see that when we get to the comparisons. Illumination down here is acceptably bright. Again, this is a very bright target that we're looking at, and in the real world, you'll probably never use it against something this bright or during the daylight hours. Anything other than daylight, though, it is exceptional. Starting out with a mini box test 4 up and 4 over, and you can see it starts out well enough. 1 over, 2, 3, and then once we get to 4 and 4, you can see that it looks like it's a little bit off. Well, I adjust the zero back on the windage, and you can see we're about 1/10 of a mil off on the right. Very peculiar so far. You'll also note that the reticle isn't perfectly lined up on the bottom, increasing the elevation to a total of 10 total mils, and we are 2/10 off on the bottom. That's 2%. Not only do we have that big difference on the elevation itself, but the windage also drifts over by about 2/10 of a mil. It is repeatable and it does go back to zero perfectly fine, but that is not a good performance. You could see when we're perfectly zeroed right now, everything lines up extremely well. So it makes me wonder what the hell is going on. And there is very little to no slop in both turrets. Despite the fact it returns to zero quite well and it is repeatable and there's no real slop in the erectors, it's not the best performance. Let's see if this thing can at least perform well optically. Here at 31 yards at 3x, we have a 37-foot field of view. At its maximum of 18x, it's a 7-foot field of view. That is quite large. I will roll in other factors from other manufacturers and scopes when we get into the comparison segment, but for right now, just take it in. This thing really is quite huge to get behind. Thanks to that minimum side parallax of 25 meters, we can hone in on this 31-yard power tower with ease. Illumination there on full is just barely noticeable when I cap the front of the objective with my hand. At 31 yards at 18x, even though we have a lot of mirage from how cold it was when I filmed with this, you can still see that there's a lot of information in this picture. But let's kick it back from 31 yards to 400 yards on our brick building, or at least what used to be my brick building. The T5s always seemed a little bit murky to me optically, both the 3-15 and the 5-25. Both of those featured the SCR reticle, which I felt was better. You know what? It really wasn't perfectly ideal in either of those magnifications, which is another reason why I think the T6Xi 2.5 to 15 would not be ideal either, because that's going to be even smaller. But anyway, the MSR2 reticle here is extremely hard to pick up even in perfectly clear, bright conditions on a very stable platform. The image though at 3x is absolutely perfect. Bringing up the magnification nice and slowly, we take a peek here at 10x. I'm a big fan of the 10x magnification on any scope, whether it's well, with the exception of LPVOs, but for MPVOs and HPVOs, I think 10x is a really sweet spot. Yeah, very sweet spot. And here, there is a massive amount of sharpness, clarity. The color representation on this thing is extremely accurate. Very vibrant, very bright, and very little to no chromatic aberration here at 10x in these conditions. I don't know if you heard that, but thunder just shook this building. That was nuts. Increasing it all the way to its maximum of 18x, I do have to tweak the side focus a little bit from where the number lined up with what I know the distance is. So if you are using the side parallax knob to gauge roughly what your distance is, it would be very close. It's within 10%, which is honestly pretty freaking good, all things considered. When this thing is fine-tuned, this thing performs insanely well. Just look at how bright, sharp, clear, and crisp this image is. Edge to edge is phenomenal. Depth of field, those tree branches all the way to the far left at 9 o'clock, those are like around 250 meters. This building's at 400, and the tree line behind it is around 700. Everything is nice, sharp, and clear, and it is truly, truly exceptional to get behind. It left me floored. Unfortunately, the MSR2 reticle, in my opinion, is again extremely too fine, even for this magnification range, and something that I would avoid going for. Light gathering is a big thing for a lot of people, especially you hunters. 56mm front objective on this thing, 34mm tube, and only a 6x multiplier means that this thing should let in a fair amount of light. Illumination on full is wonderful in these conditions, ironically, when you'd actually have to use illumination. That's actually pretty good. I'm perfectly fine with higher magnified scopes having illumination of this brightness because it's just enough. You never really need much more than this. And it is sharp, it is clear, and it is crisp, just like the image quality. Increasing the magnification all the way up to maximum, and you can see there is very little to no loss of light transmission on this thing. Again, it performs extremely, extremely well. This is something that I would absolutely have no problem taking out in the field and using in lower light environments, even if my eyeball pupil was larger than the exit pupil on this thing. And you know what, while we're on the topic of exit pupil, Steiner claims 9.7mm at 3x and 3.2mm at 18x. That might not sound like a lot, but it's a lot. Also, for any of you wondering how good this illumination looks under night vision, well, this is with a Gen 3-ish PVS-14. I really don't know if it's a Gen 3. If it is, I don't think it's a very good tube Gen 3 because I got the chance to look through some Gen 2 pluses, and they actually looked better than this. But nevertheless, under night vision, this thing performs, again, exceptionally well, and that illumination just looks the part. This is a very crude, rudimentary setup that I just threw together just to try to capture it, and I must say I am pleasantly surprised by not only the illumination and how beautiful it looks, but also how bright the image still is looking through this thing in higher magnification. Again, a truly wonderful performance. Image stability. You've heard it mentioned on this channel at least once or twice if you've ever watched any of my other videos, and that is just when your eye is slightly off center, does the image lose any sharpness and does the reticle lose any sharpness? At 18x, we have an insanely good looking image here at 900 yards, and if we shift the camera side to side slightly, both the image and the reticle maintain a very high level of sharpness up until you can't look through it anymore. Again, this is a very good performance. It is vastly improved over the T5s, and something, again, due to its large exit pupil, is quite forgiving when you get behind it. Bringing the magnification back down to around 10x, and again, that image is just so crispy. It's like a perfectly baked tater tot. It just crunches in your mouth. It's just bursting with flavor. Here at 10x, it performs better than it does at 18x, and the exit pupil is much lighter, so we have a lot more wiggle room going side to side while we can still manage to look through this thing. It does start to fall apart at the very extremes, but you're not going to be able to look through this thing anyway when you're that far out. Bringing the magnification all the way back down to its minimum at 3x, it continues the trend that we've seen so far, but it does add a tiny bit of distortion when you really get off center, but that is not uncommon with any other magnified optic. Overall, this is a tremendous performance. Taking a more dynamic approach behind this, you could really see how forgiving this optic truly is. At 3x, you could dance behind it better than any other 3x prism on the market. It is wonderful, and it doesn't stop there. Truth be told, getting behind this thing in any magnification, even with a slightly messed up cheek weld, I almost made a boo-boo and said an F-bomb, it's perfectly fine. Better than fine, in fact. It's great. Typically, you find Eyeboxes this forgiving with the 4x or 5x magnifier setup, but having a 6x magnifier like this truly is an achievement and something that Steiner should be proud of. It's something that I had no problems getting behind at any time and using it effectively. However, that reticle really is a huge limiting factor for me, and something that I'm going to harp on about. The MSR2 reticle is not designed for this magnification range. And that's something that not just Steiner, but many other scope manufacturers and brands are doing. They're taking reticles that are designed for much higher magnification scopes and just throwing them, they're shoehorning them into lower magnified optics and expecting them to work out fine. And truth be told, I don't think that they do. I think they really absolutely suck. Because this scope has a maximum magnification above 10x, we can take it out to 1,000 yards. At 0 added mils of elevation, we have a good looking image here on this house. Now, there is a ton of mirage in the air. Again, it's very cold outside, and back when I filmed this in my apartment, it was very hot, and there's only so much I could have done with the air turbulence. Bringing it up 10 full mils and refocusing my 0, you can see that the image loses a fair amount of sharpness. I try to mitigate this by adjusting the side parallax, but really it doesn't do a whole lot for it. It's something that I wasn't quite expecting given how this thing has performed so far. It's been, quite frankly, stellar. I adjust my camera up and down to see if maybe the exit pupil had shifted a little bit, but it really doesn't seem to fix much of anything. Maybe I fine-tune it just a touch more and it does get a little bit better right there. But all in all, maybe the mirage had a lot to do with it more than I was expecting, but it wasn't as good of a performance as I have seen from multiple different scopes. Let's start these comparisons by going up against one of its younger brothers, the Steiner T5Xi 4-16x56. The lineage between these two scopes is pretty close, but they can't really be seen as being true one-on-one comparisons or perfect competitors to one another. They both feature 34mm tubes, 56mm front objectives, CR2450 batteries, but that's about it. Some of the other controls, like the magnification ring, are the same, but other than that, they are completely dissimilar. The view through the T5Xi is quite large, but putting it side by side with the T6 really shows you just how much larger the T6 is compared to the P4. Now, the P4 didn't have as bad a chromatic aberration as the T5s, but the T6 here will start exuberating some of that purple fringing on the hard contrast areas when we start looking at other targets. It requires very particular lighting environments for it to really be prevalent and noticeable. It's nowhere near as bad as the T5s, but it's still there. If you hate chromatic aberration, you will notice it on this, but it's nowhere near as bad as it had been on previous models. As far as price point, the P4s you could find used for around $900 in really, really good shape. T6s, again, are going to be about double that price. Weight-wise, the P4 is 30 ounces, the T6 is around 34, but the biggest thing is going to be the field of view. Granted, the magnification ranges are completely different on these two, so that's something to take into consideration. We already talked about the T6. The T6 is 37 feet to 7 feet, whereas the P4 is 27.5 to 6.9. So even though there's 2x difference between these two, they share about the same field of view at their maximums, but yet you have 2 extra X on the T6. That just goes to show you how large that view and that field of view really truly are. Exit pupil on the P4 isn't that small. In fact, it's quite large by comparison, but that's probably because the 4x multiplier as opposed to the 6x. At the minimum, Steiner claims 14mm to 3.5mm, whereas with the T6, we have 9.7 to 3.2mm. These two are not real competitors, but I wanted to showcase that Steiner has come a long way since the P4 series of scopes. The P4 was a great scope. With the SCR reticle as seen here, it's a good mix for the 4-16. I think 4x, it's just where that reticle really starts to shine. And at 16x as seen here, it is more than usable. I think it's actually a much better balanced reticle than the MSR2 reticle is pound for pound. Which one do I prefer between these two? It's going to be the T6. It's just a better outfitted scope overall, despite its just minor shortcomings. Putting the T6 side by side with what I would consider to be a more budget-friendly alternative to the T6 is the Meopta Optica 6 3-18x50. The Meopta comes with a 30mm tube as opposed to 34mm, a 50mm front objective as opposed to a 56, but it also comes in, again, around half the price, which is quite substantial. I also think that the MRED1 reticle found in the Meopta is a much better choice for the magnification range. As far as the weight, the Meopta comes in about 4 ounces lighter, which is pretty big, especially if you're going to be running with this thing up a mountain for, days on end. But beyond that, it's about an inch longer than the T6. The field of view is nowhere near as good, however. The Meopta never had a giant view looking through it, but it's still serviceable. But when you put these two side by side, there is no comparison. The T6 absolutely dominates it. We've already talked about the numbers on the T6, but for the Meopta, you're talking about 33.5 feet to 5.8 feet. It doesn't sound like a big difference, but that's more than 10%, and that really does start to add up. The exit pupil on both of these, though, are pretty similar. At 3x, the Meopta claims 9.5mm to 9.7 on the T6, but at the maximum, you have 2.8 on the Meopta and 3.2 on the T6. So the T6 will be a little bit easier to get behind as far as exit pupil goes and Eyebox, but that is, again, to be expected. It's just a powerhouse when it comes to that. But the Meopta is not that far behind. If you're willing to sacrifice a few things like field of view downrange, I mean, just look at these two here at 10x. There is a very clear difference between these two. If you're looking for a very large view downrange, the T6 is exceptional, especially when compared to the Meopta. But if you're okay with not having as large of a view, maybe spending half the price and having a scope that performs, in my opinion, with the MRED1 reticle better than at least with the MSR2 here. I can't vouch for the SCR2. The likelihood of me getting my hands on one of those is probably very slim. I'm not going to hold my breath on it. But truly, the Meopta is, in my opinion, still a budget champion, but budget being under $1,000. I think it does everything that the T6 is trying to do, but it's not so much lower that you're really missing out on that much saving, $800-ish, if not more. Picking a winner between these two is actually quite hard. I would almost say flip a coin. The Meopta has been truly fantastic for me, but if I was going for a more quote-unquote tactical scope, the T6 is just, it's awesome. But it does have two big issues that we've already seen so far. The biggest, of course, being that tracking. It is way off. And then the reticle is, I'm going to harp on it a lot because it was something that in use, it's like right there, it's almost invisible to the naked eye when you're behind this thing. It's really, really just, it's not set up for it. It's not optimized in the slightest. Don't worry, we're going to talk about the NX8 right here, right now. If you want to buy another scope in the roughly $2,000 price point that is extremely well made and performs exceptionally well, how could we not talk about the Nightforce NX8 2.5 to 20 by 50? This thing is a powerhouse, and when you look at these two side by side, you can absolutely see that the T6Xi is up against some extremely stiff competition. Are these two identical? Are these two a worthy comparison to one another? I think so, despite the fact that they don't offer the exact same features. The NX8 does not offer a locking elevation, but it does have a capped windage, which is pretty nice. The illumination on the NX8 is also kind of weak, but you have a lot of reticle options for the NX8. They're both around the same price, but there's a lot of other things that we must talk about. First off, the field of view looking through the NX8 is basically on par with the T6, but the NX8 also has another trick up its sleeve. Its field of view is also quite massive. Talking about the T6, our field of view is 37 feet to 7 feet. On the NX8, 41.8. That's that extra half X down low to 7 feet. That's 2 extra X up at the maximum magnification, yet it has the exact same field of view downrange. Talk about impressive. The NX8 is also substantially lighter. It's about 6 ounces lighter and 1.5 inches shorter. It also comes black in FDE, and the FDE really is quite lovely. Another party piece to the NX8, it has an 11-yard minimum side parallax. That compared to the T6's minimum of 25 meters is less than half. That again is really, really impressive. The NX8 also handles chromatic aberration much better than the T6, even though the T6 is significantly better than the T5s by a very large margin. But if you're looking for something that's going to give you a more accurate representation to colors and you don't have to worry about chromatic aberration, the NX8 is probably going to be your choice. However, it's not all bells and whistles. It's not all peaches and cream. The NX8 does have some flaws, namely with the exit pupil. The exit pupil on the T6, to remind you, is 9.7 at the minimum, On the NX8, it's only 7.1, and that's with a lower magnification. Things only get worse from there. At the maximum, the T6 is at 3.2. On the NX8, 2.5. That means that getting behind the NX8 is significantly more challenging than the T6. Despite the fact that the NX8 only has a 30mm main tube, it doesn't lose that much on the elevation adjustment. You have 32 mils of maximum elevation for the NX8 and 35 for the T6. These two scopes have more things they don't have in common as opposed to things that they do have in common. Which one would I pick? I'd have to probably flip a coin to be brutally honest. But I don't think you would go wrong with buying either of these. They're both wonderful in their own right. How can I expect to answer the question, is the T6 better than the T5, without directly putting them head to head against one another? This T5Xi is the 3-15x50 featuring the SCR reticle. These both feature 34mm main tubes, and that's about it. Actually, no. The side parallax and the illumination knobs are basically the same, as are the magnification and the fast focus eyepiece with the locking diopter ring, which is, again, fantastic. But that's not why we're looking at these two scopes. We're looking to see if the T6 performs better than the T5. Well, right off the bat, the view through the T5 is substantially smaller than what we see through the T6. As far as the field of view between these two, you have 36 feet with the T5 and 37 feet with the T6. So the T6 is also an improvement there. On the maximum, it's going to be different because the T5 is only a 15x on the top end, whereas the T6 is, of course, an 18x. And with that, we have 7.3 for the T5 and 7 foot for the T6. So again, the T6 is going to pull ahead. As far as what we see with the exit pupil, it's actually better with the T5. The T5 claims to have 12mm on the minimum and 3.4 on the maximum. So a significantly larger exit pupil means that a much easier time getting behind it down at 3x. On the top end, it's, as near as makes no difference, right in line with that. The T5 is also a little bit shorter by about a ½ inch, and it is a little bit lighter by about 4 ounces. So not uncommon with what we've seen so far. You can see here at our 400-yard brick building that there is some chromatic aberration creeping up on the T5. But again, not all that much. The T6 does handle chromatic aberration much better. The colors are better with the T6, the sharpness is better with the T6, and so is the contrast. But the T5 is not a bad performer in any of those facets. However, if we were to back out the T6 215x to match it with the T5, it would perform even better than what it currently looks like here at 18x. So the T6 absolutely wins, in my opinion, when it comes to optical performance. Mix that in with really nice locks on the windage and elevation turrets, and you have a recipe for a definite improvement. But is it improvement enough? Is the T6 better than the T5 series? I believe it is, at least in this example that I had, even though the tracking was nowhere near where it should be for this sort of price point. Could that have just been simply down to this one particular optic as an example, as opposed to everything else that I could have gotten my hands on? That is a very real possibility and something that we have to factor in. Regardless of that, though, it didn't do all that great with 10 plus mils of added elevation. The image quality really did taper off quickly, and it really wasn't that easy to get it back to where it needed to be sharpness-wise. Again, could that be down to this example? There are too many variables to know for certain, unless I got my hands on like 10 more of these and ran the exact same tests. And the likelihood of that is very slim to none. When these first came out, I was really interested in buying one of these, particularly for my Tikka CTR. I think it has everything that I would want in a scope like this, even if it is a little bit heavier than some of my other go-to 3-18s or 3-15s. I wouldn't care, given the fact that this thing does have a 56mm front objective and a very large view looking through it. I would also prefer this over the NX8 because of the locking turrets. I'm a huge fan of them. But I cannot get over this MSR2 reticle. It is just way too fine in this magnification range. Again, in a 5-30, I think it would really start to shine. I wish I can get my hands on an SCR2 so I can run another review for that to see if it does improve upon this scope even further. I really do think it will. But I think there are other options for reticles out there that Steiner just isn't using, and I can't figure out as to why. Even on the SCR that we just saw on the 3-15, even at 3x, it's kind of hard to use up until you get to about 5 or 6x, and that's the exact same reticle that they're using on the T6Xi 2.5-15, which means that you're still not going to be able to super efficiently use that scope and all of its capacity until you get to a higher magnification. What the hell is the point of having a 2.5x? But we did see the exact same issue with the NX8 with the MIL-XT reticle. As you saw earlier, that MIL-XT reticle really doesn't start to become usable, actually physically usable, till about 8x. So Steiner's not the only manufacturer that's fallen by the wayside with just using generic reticles for higher magnified scopes and then just getting them shoehorned into something like this. It's a trend that I really hope manufacturers stop doing, because I think they're taking a product that could really be excellent and lowering them down to just good. And who wants just that when you can buy something that truly is next level? With that, I want to thank the individual that sent this in for review. This thing is long overdue. I do think it is a vast improvement over the T5s. I wish this thing tracked better. Again, I don't know if it was just this one example. If you've had experience with a T6Xi in the past, in your findings, please let me know in the comment section below what you have had an issue with, or if you haven't had any issues. I'm genuinely curious, as are people that are genuinely curious about buying one of these scopes. So again, thank you very much for sending this in, and thank you all very much for watching. As always, see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe Stars subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you could still help by using my affiliate links in the description below, and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.